So I wasn't going to share this story, so Macy, forgive me in advance, but I have to share this story because it's a perfect opener to where we're going today. So as a parent, we ask lots of questions, right? We always want to seek answers from our kids. How was your day? What'd you do? Who did you hang out with, right? So a lot of times we want responses. We want answers. But sometimes there are times that we ask a question and there's no need for an answer, right? So Macy, when she was growing up, she used to watch a lot of Disney. And to my dismay, I had to take Disney away from her because she was picking up on the sass, all the sarcasm, all the sass. And so there was one time she was hanging out with a friend sitting at the counter and she was getting a little sassy. So I, at one point, just looked, I said, Macy, in front of her friend, which I don't normally do, you need to knock it off. And her response was, whatever. And I snapped my head around and I said, what did you say? And I did not ask her what she said because I didn't hear it. And I did not want her to repeat it. I was asking, what did you say, as a rhetorical question, because I needed her to stop and think about what she just said and see if she wanted to change her response so she could live to see another day, right?
She's still here. So.
She's still here.
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. But I start off with that story because rhetorical questions are very important. And we're kicking off this new series today where we're going to talk about some of the rhetorical questions of God or Jesus. And there are lots of times in Scripture where God and Jesus offer up a question within the context of their conversations. And it isn't because they don't know the answer, right? It was usually because they wanted the person to stop and evaluate their own heart. And as I was doing research for some of this, I came across a scholar who defined and says the reason for deity to ask a question is fourfold. And these are on your outline. And I'm going to put these on your outline every week because we need to use these to evaluate and go through the questions we're going through to do some internal reflection. So the first one is encourage self-reflection and awareness of one's actions. Highlight personal responsibility and moral accountability. Invite humans into a deeper relationship with them. And finally, challenge individuals to trust in his power and guidance. So as we go through these, I want us to come back to these and use that as a launching pad for discussion or personal reflection. But with those insights in mind and in no particular order, I want to highlight a handful of these questions that are found in Scripture. And I'm going to highlight the question and cover the context surrounding them in Scripture that God or Jesus decided to ask a question and reflect on why he decided to ask a question rather than preach a sermon or give the answer. Okay, so our first question that we're going to tackle today is when Jesus asks, why are you so afraid? If anybody in this room has tackled fear and you never feel fear, please tell me now and give me your answers on how you've managed to do that. But as humans, we all encounter fear. So I want to read through a short little scripture I found in Mark 4, where Jesus uses this question, okay? So on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat. So this is the disciples taking Jesus in their boat, right? Took him just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. So it's flooding with water. But he was in the stern, asleep. He, Jesus, is in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, Jesus said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So there's so much richness in this, but we're going to focus mostly on the context of the question, right? But first I have to dial up and set the scenario, right? Let's talk about this storm. We've actually talked about this before, so this might be review for some of you. But remember, the Sea of Galilee, where they were, is 13 miles long and 6 to 7 miles wide. Not huge, but because of the surrounding mountains and the environmental factors, the weather patterns could change in an instant. And waves on this sea could reach up to 25 feet high, almost instantaneously. So the storm was massive. Scholars say it was massive. And the boat was bouncing around like a rubber ball. Water was flooding it faster than the men could keep up with. And some of these were professional fishermen, right? And they knew how to handle a boat. And yet the scripture says they were terrified for their life. So in the middle of this frightening ordeal, the first words out of Jesus's mouth to them after addressing the storm was, "Why are you so afraid?" It's kind of an offensive question to ask someone who feels like they're in danger of losing their life, right? Isn't it a natural response, right? Personally, I probably would have smarted something off, like that's where she gets her sass, obviously. But I probably would have been like, well, if you hadn't been napping on your pillow pet, maybe you'd understand why we're all so afraid. If you'd been here, maybe you would know why we're all so afraid. But I'm just being real. Scholars believe that this particular storm was actually intended to test the disciples. And this is the only scripture that refers to Jesus sleeping. In such a peril circumstance for humanity, he's sleeping. Makes me wonder, though, if he was lying on his back, in the back of the boat, kind of one eyed open, watching, seeing what they're doing, not really sleeping, but it says he was sleeping. So probably was sleeping. But Jesus didn't test them. God did not test them to watch them fail. He allowed the storm in order to reveal the condition of their heart. So he asked the question, "Why are you so afraid?" So that they would do some soul searching. And that's why, of all of these questions that we're going to cover, it's important and crucial that we ask ourselves the same question that Jesus asked in the Bible. But notice that Jesus follows, "Why are you so afraid?" with, "Have you still no faith?" Still, right? And we're going to cover that in just a minute, but that's a very important, crucial word here. But Jesus, in his response, is giving the answer. He's saying that their lack of faith is directly related to their growing fear. But like many of us do, they gave into their fear, and consequently their faith suffered. Fear and faith are opposing forces, and they are battle against each other for the same space in our heart and mind. Fear will drive out faith, or faith will drive out fear. In that one sentence, that's what Jesus himself, is saying. And before Jesus addressed the condition of their circumstances, he addresses the condition of their heart, because he saw fear, not faith. Meaning there is fear, their fear. Jesus is saying your fear is more dangerous than the threatening storm around you for the internal damage that it will do. And let's talk about fear for a minute. Some fear is natural, right? Like babies go through separation anxiety. Some fear is learned. My middle son, he learned very much the hard way to be afraid of bees. Don't mess with the beehive, right? He learned to be afraid. But the disciples here, they were experiencing both. They were experiencing natural fear because the storm was way bigger and out of their control. But they were also learned fear because most of these guys had probably known someone who had died in one of these storms. So they had the whole gamut. Understandable from our human perspective. But yet Jesus rebuked both types of fear. I know it's natural to be afraid. I know you've learned to be afraid. But I'm saying, why are you so afraid? And we all encounter moments of fear, maybe even every single day in our life, right? But before we can increase our faith in these moments that drives out fear, we have to ask ourselves, why are we so afraid? Here are some possible answers to that question. And I want to hear from you as well when we have our ending discussion. But number one, point blank, we're afraid because of what we think. When the disciples woke up Jesus, they woke up saying, we are perishing. That's what they were thinking. Did they die that day? No. Did their thoughts lead them to believe that they would die that day? Yes. Did their thoughts make them more afraid? Yes. Studies show that 85 to 90% of things that we fear or think will happen never actually happen. That's a lot of thought energy being put into things that never will come to fruition. And when a storm hits our life, personally speaking, when circumstances are out of control, our thoughts form all kinds of lies. And the problem is our hearts respond like those thoughts are true, like those thoughts are reality. And the enemy wants fear to write this story of doom and despair. What if I lose my job? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if, right? So fear can create this story of thoughts that we were never meant to think. We were never meant to live out. It causes us to believe that what we don't know is more dangerous than what we do know, right? Fear tells us that, oh, this is the end of the story. This is it. This is how it all goes down. But faith instead should be telling us that we're still in progress. God's still writing the story, but the disciples didn't see that. All they thought was, we're perishing. But did you know, neuroscience tells us the physical toll that fear has on our bodies is only a snapshot of what it actually does to our faith. We've all heard the story, the statistics, stress and fear, what it does to our physical body. Imagine what it does to our spiritual. Some of us need to be rescued from our thoughts more than we need to be rescued from our circumstances. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. So basically, Jesus was calling them to take their thought of they were going to perish captive and surrender it to the power of Christ in this moment. So the question we should ask, are my thoughts in line with the reality and the truth of God and who he is and his word? The second thing I think that I see in the scripture, we're afraid because we take the storm personally. We take our circumstances personally. We take our hardships personally, right? If you go back to verse 38, when the disciples woke Jesus up, they said, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? How can you sleep while we're suffering is basically what they're saying. In the middle of some hardship or trial, have you ever felt like, oh my gosh, where are you, God? I cannot see you. I cannot feel you. That he doesn't care enough to do something to take away the pain or the trial that we're dealing with. That he doesn't love us enough to heal or remove the circumstances. But then sometimes when the storm is over and suddenly we can give God the credit for the outcome, but we're too offended in the middle of the storm to see that he's actually been there the whole time. We take it personally, right? So fear tells us that our lack of healing or resolution to our circumstances means that God just doesn't really care. That's what fear will tell us. But faith tells us that God's silence does not equal his absence in our lives. Deuteronomy 31:8 says, do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will never fail you nor abandon you. I love how it says he will personally go ahead of you. Because fear tells us God sent me into this storm, into this crap show, so to speak. But faith says God was waiting for me in the storm. He's already felt my pain. He's already suffered the agony that I am suffering. He's already experienced this personally, so I don't have to take it personally. We don't have to take it personally because God has already personally experienced this for us. But then there's a third thing that I see within the context of the scripture alone. We're afraid because we have forgotten. Fear makes us forget the past, right? Remember, Jesus said, you still have no faith. Still have no faith. Because before this storm, according to the full context, the disciples had just witnessed Jesus perform all kinds of miracles. They had just seen Jesus heal Peter's mother-in-law. They had seen Jesus touch a man with leprosy and heal him. They had seen him make a lame man walk. And they saw Jesus speak healing over a sick servant. That's just a small nutshell of some of the things that he had seen. So when he says, still you have no faith, you're forgetting what I have just done. But all at once, after experiencing these healings and these miracles, the storm blows in, and suddenly nothing that Jesus had done before mattered. As quickly as they had been amazed by his power, they lost sight of it when the boat started to rock. But understand, these are Jewish men that would have recalled Deuteronomy 8:2 when Jesus spoke. So Deuteronomy 8:2 says, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart. This is a pattern that God had developed, but they forgot the pattern. Fear made them forget. Fear makes us forget all that God has done for us in the past, because all we can focus on is the current crisis. And fear also makes us forget God's promises for the future. I love this. And this is something a scholar pointed out, and it is so cool. Look back at verse 35, how Mark begins this. He says, let us cross over to the other side. Jesus says, let us cross over to the other side. Jesus told them exactly where they were going. Fear overcame their faith that he would actually get them there. He told them in the future, we're going to be on the other side. He didn't tell them it was going to be an easy trip. Every trial, every moment has a past. Something that we can bring into it, but also every trial has a future. We can't focus on just the middle. But fear narrows our focus, and it isolates us to this moment alone. But faith, in order to push out that fear, says that you need to be reminded of who God was before and what has God told you about your future. 2 Corinthians 4:16-18 says, therefore we do not lose heart, meaning that we do not stress. This means we do not stress or fear. That's what it's saying by do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. We cannot fix our eyes on the storm or the circumstances. They have to be fixed on Jesus and what he's doing for the eternity of our life. But the problem, their fear, the disciples' fear, wasn't what Jesus wasn't. Their fear over what Jesus wasn't doing was more powerful than their faith in what Jesus could do. So what do we do with that? Those are a few, and I want to hear more from you guys too. But I think there's some questions that we need to ask ourselves in order to increase our faith, in order to drive out fear. Or yes, drive out fear. And here's 2 questions I'll close with. Number 1, do you know what kind of man you put your faith in? The disciples at the end of it basically said, who is this man? We need to be asking that same question. Who is this Jesus that we're putting our faith in? The object of our faith determines the level of faith that we can obtain. The disciples were placing their faith in the boat's ability to withstand the storm, or their own ability to control the boat in the storm. But the moment they went from great fear to great faith was the moment they realized exactly who Jesus was, the man who was in control of the storm. Let's read it again. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The disciples are asking, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. I wonder, I'm a visionary. I like to write stories. And I wonder how long it was in that moment that the disciples would have stood there. Jesus calms the storm. It instantaneously goes back to peaceful waters. No winds, not even probably a gentle breeze. How long did they stand there? Like water dripping off their beards, their jaws dropped on the floor after Jesus calmed that storm. How long did they stand there in awe of Jesus and take that in? But when these Jewish men heard the words, "Peace, be still," that was to be a reminder of what they should have already known. Psalms 46, verse 10, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." This is the same command that Jesus is giving to the wind and the waves at this moment. Be still. Jesus was saying, let me show you that I am God. Jesus wasn't just talking to the storm, though. He was talking to the disciples. He was speaking peace into their hearts. God knows that fear is a human response because over 100 times the Bible tells us, fear not. Probably more if you take it out of that specific wording, right? Every time fear not is used, it is an imperative. It's a command. And nearly every time it is followed with why we do not need to fear. Fear not because I'm with you. Fear not because I will strengthen you. Fear not, I will protect you. I will comfort you. Fear not, I will come to your rescue over and over and over again. It's not just a command to not fear. It's a command to trust what God is saying, why we don't need to fear. And knowing about God's power and acting and living like you believe it, like you believe in his power, are 2 different things. But your faith will increase when you act like the object of your faith is able to do what he says he will do. Another question I think we can ask ourselves is number 2, do you know the perfect love of this man? Because 1 John 4:18 says there is no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear. Because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So faith in God grows when we understand the depth of his perfect love to ordain the perfect circumstances in our life. Essentially, isn't most fear about loss, right? I'm sure there's other things, but loss of comfort, loss of health, loss of money, loss of freedom, loss of security, loss of dreams, loss of relationship. So when we have fear in those spaces, when there is fear in these spaces, it means those are the places and the spaces that God has not been yet invited into. We have not allowed his perfect love to be in those spaces with us. Because perfect love drives out the fear of those things. So when the disciples cried out to Jesus in fear, he answered them with a challenge to look at their hearts, right? Right now, at this moment, that you are afraid, disciples, right now that you are experiencing this, who or what are you loving more than you are loving me? What are you so afraid of losing that you can't invite me into it and allow my perfect love to cast out the fear of that? And we need to ask ourselves the same question. Who or what are we loving more that we're afraid of losing that we haven't invited Jesus into? And within that perfect love, we have to sacrifice and surrender our dreams, the people, the money, the jobs, the perfect health, or whatever we are most afraid of losing, and trust that his perfect love is enough. But notice in the context of the scripture, they went from fear of life, fear of losing their life, fear of the storm, to, Mark says, they feared. They were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Their fear transferred from fear of their circumstance to a reverent fear for Jesus in that moment. So fear limits our freedom to love and be loved by God the way he designed. Fear enslaves us. So we cannot take counsel from our fear, but only from the power and the truth of who Jesus is and what he says in his word. Every trial, every hardship, every bump in the road is an opportunity for us to make a choice. When we feel fear, we have to ask, why am I so afraid? What am I afraid of losing? Have I invited Jesus into this moment? Choose fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of suffering, and remain slaves, or choose faith in the context of his perfect love. And why is his love perfect? Let me just really quick. Why is his love perfect? Because it's unconditional. It's not dependent on us. It's only dependent on him. It's unlimited. It's unchanging. His love is perfect because God and Jesus, they don't feel love. They don't fall in love. They are love. It's who they are. His love, the perfect love of Jesus, is the love that we can trust in those moments when we fear, so that we can start driving fear out with our faith in who he is and trust that he's got us no matter what. But it's a choice we have to make. Fear is a choice. It may be a natural response, but it's a choice to stay in it. And so is faith.